Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take fascinating topics, unpack them so you can get smart fast.
And today we're really diving into artificial intelligence, AI, and its huge global impact.
Yeah, we're leaning heavily on the insights from Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers.
Right. Our goal here is to pull out the key ideas from Lee's analysis. How AI developed so fast, where it is now, what it means for the future.
And present it all in a way that's, well, insightful, but also easy to follow. We know you want to grasp these complex things efficiently.
That's the plan.
It's kind of amazing how AI is just everywhere in our conversations now, isn't it?
Totally. Lee tells the story he asked kindergartners about AI.
Oh, yeah.
And their questions. Robot teachers, self-driving cars crashing, even marrying robots, computers bossing us around, what happens to our jobs? These are basically the same questions world leaders and tech CEOs are asking.
That really hits home. It shows how widespread the fascination is, but also the uncertainty, maybe.
Exactly. Fascination and uncertainty. And to really frame this whole thing, Lee points back to that key moment, AlphaGo beating KG at Go.
The board game champion.
The world champion. And Lee stresses this wasn't just about a game, it was a signal. A real turning point showing this massive leap in what AI could actually do.
Okay, so let's unpack that turning point. AlphaGo's win. Lee says it was all down to deep learning. What exactly is deep learning? Why was it such a game changer?
Right, so deep learning, it's a truly different way of doing AI. Instead of programmers writing out super specific rules for every little thing.
Like if this happens, do that.
Exactly, like a very detailed recipe. Deep learning is more like showing a system thousands, millions of examples, pictures of cats, pictures of dogs.
Okay.
And eventually it just learns to tell the difference on its own by finding patterns in all that data. We don't explicitly tell it what a cat is.
Huh. So it learns from experience, kind of.
In a way, yeah. From massive amounts of data-driven experience. And this ability, it's led to huge improvements. Lee points out deep learning systems are now better than humans at certain things.
Like what?
Identifying faces in photos, understanding speech much more accurately, even deciding who gets a loan. Apparently, they make fewer biased mistakes than human loan officers sometimes.
That's a fundamental shift then. From AI being this science fiction thing always just around the corner,
right,
to being, here, now.
Precisely. For decades, it felt like a distant promise. But deep learning, especially in the last, say, 10 years, it's pushed that revolution right into the present.
And that means?
It means we're seeing real potential for huge productivity gains across tons of industries. But, and this is a big what Lee emphasizes, it also brings the very real possibility of major disruption to jobs. As AI starts doing more tasks, humans do now.
Okay, so deep learning arrives. Big turning point.
Yeah.
And Lee says this shift involves two major transitions that are reshaping the whole AI landscape.
Yeah, two key transitions. The first one, moving from the age of discovery to the age of implementation.
Discovery to implementation. What's the difference?
The age of discovery, that was driven by a fairly small group of, frankly, brilliant researchers, mostly in the US and Canada. They did the groundbreaking work, the theory behind deep learning.
Laid the foundations.
Exactly. But Lee argues that since those huge initial breakthroughs, we haven't seen fundamental theoretical leaps on quite the same scale from any single group.
So the heavy lifting on the core ideas is kind of done. For now?
That's the suggestion. It implies the next big advances might not be totally new theories, but clever ways to apply the existing AI models to real-world problems, using lots and lots of data.
Which leads perfectly into the second transition, I guess.
You got it. The second transition is from the age of expertise to the age of data.
Expertise to data. Okay.
So in this implementation phase we're in now, the focus shifts. Yes, you still need good engineers, you need computing power, but data. Data becomes the absolute crucial ingredient.
More important than the smartest AI researcher.
Lee argues, yes, often. Once you have decent computing and talent, the sheer amount and quality of data you have becomes the biggest factor.
Yeah.
A huge data set, even with a slightly simpler algorithm maybe built by less elite engineers, can often beat a super sophisticated algorithm trained on less data. More examples to learn from just makes it better.
That makes a kind of intuitive sense. More info in, better predictions out?
Pretty much.
Now, Lee makes this really strong case that this whole shift discovery to implementation, expertise to data, gives China a unique, maybe even a decisive advantage. Why?
Okay, several things come together here. First, Lee paints this picture of China's internet startup scene as just incredibly intense, fiercely competitive.
I think so.
He calls it a gladiator coliseum. Speed, constant innovation, ruthless execution, they're essential just to survive. And copying successful ideas. It's often just seen as a smart tactic, not really stigmatized. Competition is unbelievably fierce.
Which sounds different from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, quite different. Lee contrasts it with the Valley, where, copying can be looked down upon, and sometimes companies can kind of coast on a really strong initial idea for a while.
Right.
But this gladiatorial fight in China, it's forged these incredibly tough, adaptable entrepreneurs. They have to be constantly pivoting, improving, just fighting for market share.
Okay, but how does that connect to the data advantage?
Well, that intense competition happening within China's unique alternate digital universe generates massive amounts of real-world data.
Alternate digital universe.
Yeah, think about how people in China use the internet. Very mobile first. Their phones or their wallets, their access point for everything. So they generate data not just from clicks and likes online.
Like in the West, mostly.
Right, but data about where they physically go,
Yeah.
what they buy in stores, their daily routines using all these integrated apps. It's incredibly rich data, tied to actual offline life. Lee argues it's way more comprehensive than what Silicon Valley typically collects.
So more data, and maybe better, more real-world data.
That's the argument. It gives Chinese companies this huge leg up in building AI services that are deeply woven into everyday life.
And what about the Chinese government? Where do they fit in?
Oh, they play a huge role. Lee makes it clear the government is actively strategically pushing AI development.
Yeah.
They see it as absolutely vital for economic growth, obviously, but also for global influence. Lee mentions projections. Some predict China will capture a much bigger slice of the global GDP gains from AI than North America.
Wow. That implies a real shift in economic power, potentially political power, too.
Absolutely. Economic heft often translates to global influence, soft power, all of that.
Lee uses this contrast, the cloner versus the gladiator, to make this cultural difference clearer. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. He uses Wang Xing, founder of Meituan, a huge platform, as a key example.
Right.
Wang Xing started out pretty openly copying successful U.S. models like Facebook, Twitter, Groupon. In the Valley, that might get you dismissed as just a cloner.
Right, not original.
But Wang Xing wasn't just copying. He was executing relentlessly, adapting those models perfectly for the Chinese market and competing with incredible ferocity. He became a gladiator.
So the cloning was just step one. The real win was in the fight.
Exactly. His gladiator approach, the intense focus on execution and local adaptation, let him not just survive, but completely dominate, often pushing out the original Western companies he initially copied.
And that War of 1,000 Groupons you mentioned, that's this gladiator combat in action.
Perfect example. Hundreds of companies, all basically clones of Groupon, sprang up. The competition was brutal, price wars, aggressive tactics.
Sounds exhausting.
Totally.
Huh.
And foreign players like Groupon itself, they just couldn't keep up. They got swamped. It was the local gladiators who copied each other constantly, undercut prices ruthlessly, fought for every inch. They were the ones left standing. It forged them.
Which brings us back to why so many big Silicon Valley names have, well, struggled in China. People often blame censorship or government rules.
And Lee acknowledges that plays a part, definitely. You can't ignore the regulatory environment.
But he says that's not the whole story.
Right. He argues a bigger issue is often the approach of the Western companies themselves. They tend to treat China like just another market on the global map,
Instead of
giving it the unique focus, the resources, the patience it needs. And crucially, not giving their local Chinese teams enough autonomy to really compete with those fast-moving local gladiators.
So headquarters back in the U.S. is making decisions that don't quite fit the local reality.
Often, yeah. They might focus on just tweaking their global product for China rather than building something totally new that fits local needs.
Yeah.
Or they're too slow to react because decisions have to go up the chain. It hampers the local team.
The classic example is Jack Ma and Alibaba versus eBay, right?
Oh, absolutely legendary. Ma called it a guerrilla war. eBay came in, the global giant, but Alibaba, Taobao specifically, they adapted brilliantly. They created Alipay because people didn't trust online payments yet. They built instant messaging right into the platform so buyers and sellers could haggle, which Chinese consumers expected.
And the pricing.
Big difference. eBay charged listing fees. Taobao made basic listings a freemium model. It drew in tons of small sellers. eBay, with its rigid global model and decisions made far away, just couldn't adapt quickly enough. Taobao won.
It's fascinating. Another unique thing in China Lee highlights is how they basically skipped credit cards and went straight to mobile payments.
Yeah, a total leapfrog, driven largely by Alibaba's Alipay and Tencent's WeChat wallet.
WeChat. That started as just messaging, didn't it?
It did, but it evolved into this incredible super app. Messaging, social media, payments, booking taxis, ordering food, paying utility bills, everything in one place. Seamless online to offline or O2O integration.
O2O, right.
And it dominates daily life.
And wasn't there this clever trick with digital red envelopes that really boosted WeChat Pay?
Oh yeah, that was genius. They digitized the traditional gift of money in red envelopes for Chinese New Year.
Ah, the cultural connection.
Exactly. Made it social, fun, almost a game. Millions and millions of people linked their bank accounts to WeChat almost overnight just to send and receive these digital red packets. Jack Ma himself called it a Pearl Harbor attack on Alipay's dominance.
Wow, so that mobile payment boom fueled this explosion in O2O services.
Absolutely. Suddenly, it was easy to pay for anything with your phone. So you saw incredible growth in food delivery, ride-hailing, local services, and that bike-sharing craze.
Mobike of a Kafo. Those were huge for a while.
Unbelievably huge. Lee points out Mobike alone was handling millions of rides a day at its peak, more than Uber globally at the time. And think about the data that generates.
Right. Where people are going, when, how often. Incredible real-world data again.
Precisely. A massive, detailed picture of offline life and consumption.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Lee also talks about how China cultivates innovation differently, more top-down, government-led.
Yeah, there's a strong element of that. The government has been very deliberate in trying to build an innovation ecosystem.
Ow.
Things like creating dedicated zones, like the Avenue of the Entrepreneurs, offering subsidized rent and resources for startups, setting up tons of incubators across the country, often backed by government funds or incentives.
Like guiding funds.
Exactly. Using public money to attract private venture capital into specific strategic sectors the government wants to promote. It's a much more hands-on, directed approach.
Which contrasts pretty sharply with the Silicon Valley story, which is often about, culture, freedom, bottom-up innovation.
Right. The Valley narrative emphasizes that sort of organic ecosystem, risk-taking culture, serendipity. Lee acknowledges that's powerful, but argues that for China, at its stage of development, this more directed, top-down support, providing infrastructure funding, clear goals, was really effective in kickstarting things quickly.
So all these factors, the competition, the mobile payments, the O2O, the government push, they created what Lee calls this parallel internet universe in China.
That's his term, yeah. And it has really distinct features.
Such as?
Overwhelmingly mobile-first users. The smartphone is the digital wallet. And these incredibly dense cities make the blending of online and offline life, that O2O model, worked extremely well.
And the data generated there
is deeply tied to real-world actions, buying groceries, taking a bike, paying bills. Lee argues it's just a richer, more valuable training ground for AI that aims to interact with the physical world.
Okay, let's talk talent. Developing advanced AI needs brilliant people. How does China stack up against, say, the U.S. there?
Well, initially, the U.S. definitely had a big lead in top-tier AI research talent, especially concentrated in places like Google, the big tech labs.
But China's catching up.
Rapidly.
Yeah.
Lee talks about how Chinese students and researchers are just voraciously consuming all the global AI knowledge, reading papers on Ardil the moment they're published, discussing them in WeChat groups. A massive effort to absorb and learn.
And there are the 7 giants Lee mentions.
Right. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft in the U.S., and Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent in China, BAT as they're called.
The giants.
These companies have this incredible concentration of both talent and data. Lee calls them the new power grids for AI. They have the resources, the engineers, and the massive data sets to drive innovation.
Lee also uses this framework of 4 waves of AI to track its progress. Can you sketch those out?
Sure. Wave 1 is Internet AI, using data from online activity, clicks, searches, purchases.
Okay.
Wave 2 is Business AI, applying AI to optimize existing business processes using structured enterprise data.
Makes sense.
Wave 3 is Perception AI, giving machines senses, sight, hearing, think facial recognition, voice assistance, analyzing sensor data from the physical world.
Get more complex.
Definitely. And Wave 4 is Autonomous AI, machines that can make decisions, act independently, integrate all the previous waves. Self-driving cars are the classic example, but it's broader than that.
And where does China stand in these waves?
Lee argues China has a real edge in Internet AI already. Think ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, their Tixiao news app, is incredibly sophisticated at personalization, driven by AI analyzing reading habits. Massive user base, single language helps there.
Right. What about the others?
They're making huge strides in perception AI. Facial recognition tech from companies like Face++ is world-class, and they leverage the manufacturing powerhouse of Shenzhen for smart devices. Look at Xiaomi's ecosystem. Business AI is growing fast, too.
And autonomous AI, the trickiest one.
The U.S. still has a lead there, Lee reckons. It relies more on that cutting-edge fundamental research. But China is investing massively, building infrastructure for smart cities like Xi'an and pushing hard on self-driving tech development. They're closing the gap fast.
It's also interesting how the U.S. and Chinese giants seem to be expanding globally in different ways.
Yeah, Lee contrasts those strategies. American giants often go for a direct market entry, trying to replicate their home model, maybe with some localization, but fundamentally conquering the market themselves.
And China's approach
Seems to be more about investing in and empowering local players in different countries, arming the local insurgents, as he puts it, with capital and technology, rather than trying to directly run everything from China.
Okay, so we've covered the incredible rise, the competition, the technology, but Lee spends a significant part of the book on the potential downsides, the societal impact.
Absolutely. He doesn't shy away from the tough questions, particularly job displacement and rising inequality.
He even brings up that sci-fi story, Folding Beijing.
Yeah, as a kind of cautionary tale, it depicts this future city starkly divided between the hyper-productive elite and a vast underclass with little work or purpose. Lee sees a real risk of AI pushing us towards something like that if we're not careful.
But isn't there the argument, the Luddite fallacy, that new tech always creates new jobs eventually?
He addresses that directly. Some techno-optimists say, don't worry, we've been through this before, but Lee sides with those who think AI might be different. Because it's a general-purpose technology like steam power or electricity, fundamentally changing everything. And because it's software-based, it can spread and improve incredibly fast, potentially displacing jobs much quicker than economies can adapt and create new ones, especially white-collar information processing jobs.
He mentions the great decoupling in the U.S., too.
Right. Productivity goes up, technology advances, but wages for many people stagnate or fall. Employment rates decline for some groups. It suggests the benefits aren't automatically shared. AI could make that decoupling even worse.
And the estimates for how many jobs are actually at risk, they vary a lot, don't they?
They do. Lee mentions the Oxford study, which predicted a very high percentage of jobs were vulnerable, versus others like the OECD, which look more at automating tasks within jobs, leading to lower overall job loss figures.
Where does Lee land?
He's pretty skeptical of the lower estimates. He thinks AI is advancing so fast, especially in understanding language and images, that it will automate more than many models predict. And he specifically flags China as potential ground zero because of its huge manufacturing and agriculture sectors.
And it's not just job losses, but the type of economy AI might create. Lee talks about monopolies.
Yeah, AI thrives on data. The more data you have, the better your AI gets, which attracts more users who generate more data. It's a feedback loop.
A virtuous cycle for the winner.
Exactly. It naturally leads to winner-take-all markets, a few giant companies dominating. This could massively increase inequality, both within countries and globally.
Creating this corporate oligarchy. And maybe a large group of people left behind, the useless class, some have called it.
That's the grim picture Lee sketches as a possible future. Unprecedented wealth for a few, alongside extreme inequality and potentially millions finding their skills obsolete. It's not just an economic problem, it hits at human dignity, purpose.
He quotes Frank Walsh about the psychological damage of unemployment.
Yeah, losing that sense of contributing, of being valued. It's deeply damaging.
It's a heavy set of concerns. But the book takes a turn here, doesn't it? Lee shares his own personal story.
It's incredibly powerful. He talks very openly about his cancer diagnosis. Stage 4 lymphoma initially.
That must have been terrifying.
Completely. And it forced him to stop, to completely reevaluate his life. He realized his whole focus had been on work, on maximizing his impact, his legacy.
The typical Silicon Valley mindset, maybe? Optimization?
Very much so. He describes himself as almost machine-like in his pursuit of achievement. And he realized he'd neglected what truly mattered: love, connection with his family, just being human.
He gives some specific examples, doesn't he?
Yeah.
About prioritizing work.
Yeah, a painful one about choosing a critical meeting over being there for the birth of his daughter. It starkly shows his mindset back then. And he reflects on what he wanted on his tombstone. First, it was about his tech achievements, then maybe teacher Kai-Fu, mentoring young Chinese entrepreneurs. But the illness made him see how hollow those metrics felt compared to human connection.
It's interesting, too, how his medical situation itself, the initial misdiagnosis.
Right. He mentions that. Getting a second opinion was crucial. The first diagnosis was wrong about it being stage IV. It's a potent reminder that even complex systems like medicine or AI aren't perfect. They can make mistakes. Predictions aren't destiny.
And his recovery wasn't just technology, but people.
Absolutely. He credits the medical treatment, of course, but emphasizes the love and support from his family as being just as critical, that human element.
And this whole personal journey, this transformation, it seems to feed directly into his ideas about how we should handle AI's societal impact.
Definitely. It gave him this new lens. He argues we can't just let the technology roll over us or tinker with technical fixes. We need a proactive, human-centered approach. New ways of thinking about jobs, investment, government's role.
He mentions the 3 Rs that often come up in these discussions.
Yeah, reduce work hours, retrain workers, redistribute income like universal basic income. Common proposals, especially out of Silicon Valley.
But he sees limitations there.
He acknowledges them but pushes for more. He thinks the private sector needs to step up and actively create new kinds of jobs, ones that complement AI.
Like his idea of human veneer jobs.
Exactly. Let AI do the optimization, the data crunching, the routine stuff. Humans provide the warmth, the empathy, the social connection, the care.
Especially in fields like healthcare.
Prime example, compassionate caregivers working alongside AI diagnostic tools. He believes this could create more jobs and actually improve the quality of care, making it more human.
It requires a shift in values, though, right?
Yeah.
And maybe in how companies operate.
Big time. He calls for more corporate social responsibility, for impact investing, where you look at social good, not just profit, and for social entrepreneurship focused on solving these AI-related societal problems.
And government. Does he see a role beyond just UBI?
Oh, yes. He thinks government intervention is crucial for creating a new social contract for the AI age. He floats this really interesting idea, a social investment stipend.
Social investment stipend. How's that different from UBI?
Instead of just giving everyone money unconditionally, the stipend would reward activities that benefit society but might not be traditionally paid work.
Like what?
Caring for children or the elderly, community service, volunteering, even education and retraining to adapt to the new economy. It's about valuing different kinds of contribution. He draws inspiration from places like Taiwan with strong volunteerism traditions.
Sounds complex to implement.
He admits there are challenges, open questions. How do you measure these contributions fairly? How do you fund it? But he argues these are solvable problems if we decide it's the right direction. It's about redefining value.
And looking beyond just one country, Lee really stresses learning from each other globally, doesn't he?
Absolutely. No one has all the answers. We need to learn from different cultures, different approaches.
He gives examples.
Yeah, like South Korea's focus on gifted education, U.S. strengths in social-emotional learning, the craftsmanship culture in Switzerland and Japan, volunteerism in the Netherlands and Canada, China's traditions of elder care, even Bhutan's focus on gross national happiness over just GDP.
So be open-minded. Watch what works. Share best practices.
Exactly. We need global collaboration and a willingness to adapt as we see the real-world impacts unfold.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into AI superpowers, what's the core message you think we should really take away?
I think the most vital point is that the future isn't set in stone. AI's path isn't predetermined. Our choices, our actions as individuals, companies, governments will shape what happens.
So no room for helplessness, feeling like the technology is just going to wash over us.
Definitely not. We have agency. And maybe the second key thing, drawing from Lee's personal story, is remembering what's truly important. Even as we build these incredibly powerful tools, we can't lose sight of human connection, empathy, love. That's the core.
That's a really powerful note to end on. It leaves us, and you listening, with a big question, really. What kind of future do you want to help build in this age of AI?
Yeah, what actions can you take, big or small, to steer things towards a more humanistic outcome, one that balances amazing technological progress with our deepest human values?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.